8-year-old wealthy girl wants beautiful nanny as stepmom. Sets up CEO dad with nanny, too cute. Hi, my beautiful reader, and welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. Dear Heavenly Father, I lift up my dear friend who is listening right now. Grant them strength when they feel weak, courage when they face fears, and hope when the road seems uncertain. Surround them with your love and peace, and remind them that they are never alone. Amen. In the last video, your response moved me beyond words. As I read your heartfelt comments, I couldn't help but feel tears well up in my eyes. It's in moments like those that I realize how blessed I am to have a family like you, a family that's more precious and radiant than the rarest diamonds. Your words are my strength, my inspiration, and the reason I pour my heart into every story I share with you. Tell me, how did the last story make you feel? Did it touch your heart the way your words touch mine? Now let's embark on another journey together. Let's dive into a story that I hope will move your soul and remind you of the beauty of life. Let's begin a beautiful and romantic story where two souls destined for each other find love in the most unexpected moment. The autumn wind whispered through the cemetery's ancient maple trees, their crimson leaves dancing in the crisp morning air. Timothy Raymond stood motionless before the fresh marble headstone, his newborn daughter Zoe cradled in his trembling arms. The inscription was simple yet devastating in its finality. Quinn Elizabeth Raymond, beloved wife, mother, and guardian angel. His world had shattered exactly 7 days ago. Quinn had been radiant that morning, her 8-month pregnant belly swollen with their miracle after years of trying. She had kissed him goodbye, her lips tasting of mint tea and promises, before heading to her final prenatal appointment. The October sun had painted her auburn hair gold as she waved from their driveway, and that was the last time he saw her smile. The doctors called it an amniotic fluid embolism, a rare, catastrophic complication that no one could have predicted or prevented. They had managed to save Zoe through an emergency C-section, but Quinn's heart had stopped beating minutes after their daughter took her first breath. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Timothy. One life beginning as another slipped away, their heartbeats passing each other like ships in the night. "I don't know how to do this without you," he whispered, his voice rough with unshed tears. Zoe stirred in his arms, her tiny fingers curling around his thumb as if trying to anchor him to the present. She had Quinn's eyes, that same shade of stormy blue that had captured his heart 12 years ago at a charity gala where Quinn had been volunteering. The weight of his responsibilities as CEO of Raymond Technologies seemed insignificant compared to the task before him, raising their daughter alone. The company could run itself with the competent team he'd built, but this precious bundle in his arms needed more than just his business acumen and wealth. She needed love, guidance, and the motherly touch that had been stolen from her too soon. Timothy's mother, Eloise, had offered to move in and help, but he knew that wasn't the answer. Eloise, though well-meaning, was set in her ways and still treated Timothy like the 12-year-old boy who'd lost his father to cancer. No, Zoe needed someone younger, someone who could grow with her and understand the modern world she would inherit. The idea of hiring a nanny had come from his brother Alexander, who had pointed out that many of their social circle's children had benefited from dedicated caregivers. The thought of letting a stranger into their home, into their lives, made Timothy's chest tight with anxiety, but he knew it was necessary. The interview process had been exhausting. Each candidate came highly recommended with impressive credentials and experience, but something was always missing. Some were too rigid, others too casual. A few seemed more interested in the prestige of working for the Raymond family than in caring for a motherless infant. Then Sadie Naomi walked into his office. At 18, she was younger than the other candidates, but there was an old soul wisdom in her warm brown eyes. She had just graduated high school and was taking a gap year before college, hoping to save money for her education while doing something meaningful. Her letter of recommendation from the local children's hospital, where she had volunteered in the NICU, spoke volumes about her gentle nature and intuitive understanding of infants' needs. "I know I'm young," she had said during the interview, her voice steady despite her apparent nervousness. "But I believe that sometimes the best qualifications come from the heart rather than years of experience. I lost my own mother when I was very young, and while I can't replace what Zoe has lost, I can help her understand that she is loved and supported every single day." Those words had resonated deep within Timothy's grieving heart. He saw in Sadie a reflection of Quinn's compassion, that same innate ability to see past surfaces to the heart of what mattered. When he handed Zoe to her for the first time, his daughter had immediately settled into Sadie's arms, cooing softly as if she'd found a safe harbor in a storm. Now, standing before Quinn's grave with the morning mist swirling around their feet, Timothy made two promises. The first was to Quinn, that he would ensure their daughter grew up knowing how much her mother had loved her, how she had given everything to bring her into this world. The second was to Zoe, that he would surround her with all the love and care she deserved, starting with bringing Sadie into their lives. "She'll never replace you," he whispered to Quinn's headstone, watching as a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds to illuminate the polished marble. "But I think you would approve. She has your kindness, your gentle spirit." As if in response, a warm breeze stirred the flowers surrounding the grave, Quinn's favorite lilies that Timothy had planted the day before. He chose to take it as a sign, a blessing from beyond. Quinn had always believed in signs and serendipity, finding meaning in the smallest coincidences. It was one of the countless things he had loved about her. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path behind him made Timothy turn. Sadie stood a respectful distance away, her dark curls catching the morning light. She had started work the day before, helping to prepare the nursery and familiarizing herself with Zoe's schedule. Now she waited patiently, understanding the importance of this moment without needing to be told. "Mr. Raymond," she said softly, "it's time for Zoe's feeding." Timothy nodded, grateful for her gentle reminder that life must go on, that his daughter's needs wouldn't wait for his grief to subside. As he walked toward her, Zoe made a small sound of contentment, and for the first time in 7 days, Timothy felt a tiny spark of hope. The path ahead would be challenging. He knew that. There would be sleepless nights, tears, and moments when the absence of Quinn would feel like a physical wound. But looking at Sadie's compassionate smile as she took Zoe into her arms with practiced ease, Timothy felt something shift in his heart. Perhaps this was Quinn's final gift to them, sending someone who could help heal their broken family. Together, they walked back to the waiting car, leaving Quinn to her eternal rest beneath the maple trees. The autumn wind followed them, carrying with it the promise of change, of new beginnings hidden within endings, of love that could grow in the most unexpected places. Little did Timothy know that in 8 years' time, his precious daughter would become the architect of a love story that would bring their family full circle, turning grief into joy and loneliness into completion. But for now he focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trusting that somehow they would find their way forward together. Chapter 2. Growing Hearts. 8 years flowed like a gentle river, carving new channels in the landscape of the Raymond household. The mansion that had once echoed with Timothy's solitary footsteps now buzzed with life, filled with the sound of Zoe's laughter and Sadie's warm presence. Those first months after Quinn's passing had tested them all. Sadie, barely 18 and fresh from her NICU volunteer work, had found herself responsible for not just a newborn, but a grieving family in need of healing. The sunrise painted golden streaks across Sadie's guest house kitchen as she prepared for another day. At 26, she often reflected on how far they'd all come from those early days when she'd lived in the main house's nanny suite, walking the halls with a crying Zoe through countless sleepless nights. Timothy had surprised her during her second year with them by renovating the garden cottage into her own space. "You deserve somewhere that's just yours," he'd said, while still being close enough for Zoe. The gesture had marked a shift, from employee to something more, something family-like, but undefined. Their morning routine ran like a well-choreographed dance. Sadie let herself into the main house through the kitchen door, immediately starting 2 coffee pots, dark roast for Timothy, who had never quite mastered the art of sleeping through the night, and a lighter blend for herself. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she prepared breakfast. The same gentle touch she'd learned years ago in the NICU now applied to creating Zoe's favorite blueberry pancakes shaped like stars. "Sadie!" 8-year-old Zoe bounded into the kitchen, her dark curls still messy from sleep, stormy blue eyes bright with excitement. She climbed onto her usual spot at the island, immediately starting to arrange her fruit into a smiley face pattern. "Do you remember the first time you made me pancakes?" Sadie flipped another perfect star onto the growing stack. "Of course I do, sweetheart. You were barely old enough to sit up in your high chair. Your dad was so worried you'd choke that I had to cut each piece into tiny bites and demonstrate eating them myself before he'd let you try." "Daddy worries too much," Zoe declared with the confidence of childhood. "But you always make him feel better." The observation made Sadie's cheeks warm, and she busied herself with pouring more batter onto the griddle. Over the years, she'd learned to read Timothy's moods like a familiar book, knew when work stress meant he needed space, when memories of Quinn meant he needed company, when Zoe's growing resemblance to her mother left him both joyful and aching. "Is someone talking about me?" Timothy's voice interrupted her thoughts as he entered the kitchen, already dressed for work in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, though his hair betrayed another restless night. "Always," Zoe giggled, launching herself from her stool to give him her customary morning hug. He caught her easily, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Good morning, Sadie," he said softly, their eyes meeting over Zoe's curls. "Something smells wonderful." "Just your daughter's favorite breakfast," Sadie replied, turning back to the stove to hide the flush she could feel creeping up her neck. After 8 years, she should have been immune to the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, but her heart hadn't gotten the message. The kitchen calendar showed a busy day ahead. Zoe had ballet class after school, followed by a piano lesson with Miss Caroline. These days, school brought its own joys and challenges. Brooklyn Anderson, Zoe's best friend since kindergarten, had become like a second daughter around the house. Her mother, Catherine, treated Sadie as part of the Raymond family rather than staff, something not all parents at Westbrook Academy managed. "Miss Caroline says I'm ready for the advanced piece," Zoe announced proudly as they settled around the kitchen island, "the one Mom used to play." A familiar silence fell at the mention of Quinn, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of years past. They had learned to speak of her naturally, keeping her memory alive without drowning in grief. Sadie had helped with this too, encouraging Zoe to ask questions about her mother and gently prompting Timothy to share stories. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Timothy said, his voice rough with emotion. "She practiced that piece for months before she felt it was perfect." "Did you know my mum, Sadie?" Zoe asked, not for the first time, but Sadie answered as she always did, with gentle honesty. "No, sweetheart, but I've learned so much about her from you and your dad. I know she loved music just like you do. I know she had your beautiful eyes and your kind heart. and I know she would be amazed by the wonderful girl you've become." The morning continued with its familiar rhythm. Timothy's phone buzzed with messages from Larry, his oldest friend and business partner at Raymond Technologies, about the upcoming board meeting. Despite the heavy responsibilities of being CEO, Timothy had never let business interfere with his commitment to being present for Zoe's daily life, something Quinn had made him promise in their last conversation. Later that afternoon, during Zoe's piano lesson, Timothy found himself pausing in the doorway of the music room. Quinn's grand piano still held pride of place, and as he watched Sadie sit with Zoe, offering quiet encouragement as small fingers found their way across familiar keys, he felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. The sunlight caught Sadie's profile, highlighting how she'd grown from the nervous teenager who first walked through his door into this remarkable young woman who had helped rebuild his broken family. That evening, as Sadie folded laundry in the warm light of sunset, she caught sight of Quinn's photograph on the mantel. The light caught Quinn's auburn hair, making it glow like captured fire. Sadie often found herself studying that image, seeing traces of both Quinn's features and her spirit in Zoe. The same stormy blue eyes, the same determination, the same capacity for joy. "That's the last of it," Timothy's voice startled her as he appeared in the doorway, Zoe's favorite stuffed rabbit in his hands. "She left this in the music room," he explained, though they both knew Zoe hadn't slept with it in years. "I'll put it in her room," Sadie offered, reaching for the toy. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment neither moved. The air seemed to thicken with unspoken words, with possibilities that neither dared to voice. "Thank you, Sadie," Timothy said softly, "for everything." "Always," she replied, and they both knew she meant it. In these quiet moments after Zoe's bedtime, when the house settled into peaceful silence, Sadie would sometimes allow herself to imagine a different kind of belonging. She pushed these thoughts away quickly. She was the nanny, after all, no matter how family-like their relationship had become. But lately, she'd noticed Zoe watching her interactions with Timothy with an increasingly thoughtful expression, her mother's intuition and father's strategic mind clearly at work behind those familiar blue eyes. What she didn't know was that in her room down the hall, little Zoe was already plotting to make those dreams come true, her bright mind working on plans that would change all their lives forever. For now, the house settled into its nighttime quiet, wrapped in the peace of routine and the warmth of growing hearts finding their way toward each other, one day at a time. Chapter 3. The plan begins. Love often blooms in unexpected moments. For Zoe Raymond, the realization that her father and Sadie belonged together came during Westbrook Academy's Career Week as she sat in her second-row seat, her mother's intuition and father's strategic mind working in perfect harmony. Brooklyn's mother, Catherine Anderson, stood at the front of Mrs. Martinez's third-grade classroom, her elegant presence commanding attention as she described her work as a wedding planner. "Love," she explained, showing slides of beautiful ceremonies, "is like a puzzle. Sometimes the pieces are right in front of us, but people need help seeing how they fit together." The words struck Zoe like a symphony's first note, making her think of quiet morning moments in their kitchen. How many times had she watched her father's eyes follow Sadie as she moved through their home? How often had she noticed Sadie's smile soften when Timothy entered a room? These weren't the quick glances of employer and employee. They were the gentle looks she'd seen in old photographs of her parents, the same way her father gazed at her mother's portrait when he thought no one was watching. That afternoon during recess, Zoe and Brooklyn claimed their usual spot under the massive oak tree that had witnessed countless friendship secrets over the past 3 years. Spring flowers dotted the lawn, their sweet scent carried on the breeze as the girls huddled over Zoe's new purple notebook. "Your mum really makes love stories happen?" Zoe asked, carefully printing Operation Cupid at the top of a fresh page. The notebook's cover sparkled in the sunlight, a gift from Brooklyn for this exact purpose. "All the time." Brooklyn's dark braids bounced with her enthusiasm. "She says sometimes people are meant to be together, but they're too scared to admit it. Like this couple last month. They were best friends for years before Mom helped them realize they were in love." Zoe thought about the way Sadie knew exactly how to comfort her father on difficult days, how she remembered every detail of his schedule, how she kept his favorite coffee stocked, even though she preferred lighter roasts. She thought about how her father always brought home wildflowers, Sadie's favorite, just because, and how he'd renovated the guest house with a kitchen perfect for Sadie's love of baking. That evening, as Sadie performed their nightly ritual of braiding Zoe's hair before bed, a tradition that had survived from infancy, the young matchmaker decided to test the waters. "Sadie," she began innocently, watching their reflection in her vanity mirror, "don't you think Daddy is handsome?" Sadie's hands froze mid-braid, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink that didn't escape Zoe's notice. For a moment, she looked as young as she had 8 years ago, when she'd first walked through their door. "That's not appropriate for me to discuss, sweetie." "Why not?" "Brooklyn says her mum tells her dad he's handsome all the time." Zoe tilted her head, causing the half-finished braid to unravel. "And Daddy is handsome. Everyone at school says so. Madison's mum called him a catch at the last bake sale." The mention of Madison's divorced mother made something flicker in Sadie's eyes, a shadow of uncertainty that only strengthened Zoe's resolve. She'd seen how Mrs. Madison flirted with her father at school functions, how Sadie would grow quiet and find reasons to be elsewhere during those moments. "Your father is well respected in the community," Sadie said carefully, resuming the braid with slightly less steady hands. "He laughs more when you're around, you know," Zoe pressed on. "Real laughs, not the kind he uses at business dinners. And you make the house feel warm, like it does in my memories of Mom." This observation, so precise for an 8-year-old, struck Sadie speechless. Her hands stilled again, and in the mirror, Zoe could see tears gathering in her eyes. "All done," Sadie announced quickly, securing the braid with a purple elastic, Zoe's current favorite color. "Time for bed, little one." "I'm not little anymore," Zoe protested, but climbed under her covers obediently. "I'm old enough to understand things." "What things?" Timothy's voice came from the doorway, making both females start slightly. He stood there in his work clothes, having just returned from a late meeting, his tie loosened and jacket draped over one arm. The soft lamplight caught his face just right, and Zoe saw Sadie's reflection swallow hard at the sight. "Grown-up things," Zoe replied cryptically, sharing a look with her stuffed giraffe that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. "Daddy, don't you think Sadie looks pretty today? She's wearing the earrings you got her for Christmas." The small pearl studs caught the light as Sadie ducked her head, a gesture that made her look young and shy and entirely too appealing. Timothy's eyes lingered on them for a moment too long before he cleared his throat. "Yes, they suit her very well," he said softly, then quickly added, "Time for sleep, Zoe. You have your science presentation tomorrow." "Wait!" Zoe called out as they both moved to leave. "I need both of you to tuck me in." "Please?" It was a new request, one designed to make them stand on either side of her bed, an echo of traditional family scenes that made something in Zoe's chest feel warm and right. She hugged them both, pulling them slightly closer together in the process, and whispered, "I love you." "We love you too, sweetheart," they replied in unison, then shared a startled glance at their synchronization. After they left her room, Zoe pulled out her secret notebook and began to write, Operation Cupid Day 1. Sadie blushed when I called Daddy handsome. Daddy noticed her earrings, the ones he spent forever picking out. Got them to tuck me in together. They said, "Love you" at the same time. Next steps. 1. Make Daddy see how pretty Sadie looks in the morning. 2. Show Sadie that Daddy needs someone to take care of him. 2. 3. Get help from Brooklyn. Her mom knows all about love. 4. Find ways to make them spend more time together. 5. Keep Madison's mom away from school events. The next morning would bring new opportunities for her matchmaking schemes, but for now she slept peacefully, dreaming of rose gardens and romantic moments and the family she knew they could become. In the guest house, Sadie lay awake, touching her pearl earrings and wondering why her heart ached at the memory of Timothy's soft voice. While in his study, Timothy found himself staring at a photograph of Zoe and Sadie laughing together, feeling something shift in his soul, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their place. And somewhere, perhaps watching over them all, Quinn smiled at her daughter's determination to help love find its way home. Chapter 4. Operation Cupid. The early morning sun painted golden patterns across Zoe's purple notebook as she sat cross-legged on her bed, Brooklyn perched beside her, both girls intently focused on their mission. Operation Cupid had moved into its active phase, and Zoe approached it with all the strategic planning she'd inherited from her father. "Love notes," Brooklyn declared, waving one of her mother's wedding planning magazines. "Mom says they're super romantic, but they have to be secret. That's what makes them special." Zoe's eyes lit up at the idea. She'd spent hours practicing her grown-up handwriting, studying the elegant loops and curves of Sadie's script. Now, with dedicated precision, she began to write the first note for her father. "Sometimes the best things in life are right in front of us." She even borrowed a tiny spritz of Sadie's lavender perfume, the one she wore on special occasions, to scent the paper. "Perfect," Brooklyn approved, her dark braids bouncing with excitement. "Now where should we put it?" The girls had mapped out the daily routines of both adults with military precision. They knew Timothy always checked his desk first thing in the morning, reviewing reports before breakfast. Sadie's favorite cookbook, the one with Quinn's handwritten notes in the margins, would be opened while planning the week's meals. Operation Cupid's headquarters had been established in Zoe's room, with Brooklyn staying over for the weekend to help launch their plans. Catherine Anderson, recognizing the matchmaking spark in her daughter's best friend, had shared some professional wisdom. "Mom says people need to spend time together doing everyday things," Brooklyn reported during their strategy session. "That's how they realize they're perfect for each other." Zoe nodded sagely, adding another note to her growing list. This one would go in Sadie's cookbook. "The way to a man's heart isn't just through his stomach, it's through his daughter too." She'd written this one in her best cursive, knowing Sadie would recognize her handwriting, but hoping the message would still resonate. The next phase required more direct intervention. After careful consideration and multiple planning sessions under their oak tree at recess, the girls had devised what Brooklyn called Operation Dishwasher. "Oops!" Zoe's theatrical gasp echoed through the kitchen as she accidentally spilled an entire gallon of milk. The white liquid spread across the floor like a flood, seeping under the dishwasher with suspicious precision. Brooklyn, stationed at the kitchen door as lookout, gave a subtle thumbs up. The repair couldn't be scheduled until the following week, forcing Timothy and Sadie to wash dishes together after dinner. Zoe watched from her homework spot at the kitchen island, pretending to focus on mathematics while covertly observing their interaction. Timothy rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms as he plunged his hands into the soapy water. Sadie stood beside him with a drying towel, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they worked. Neither seemed in any hurry to finish, falling into an easy rhythm, Timothy washing, Sadie drying, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed plates back and forth. What caught Zoe's attention most was the music. Sadie hummed softly under her breath, the same lullaby she used to sing to Zoe when she was smaller. It was a melody Zoe had heard her father whistle sometimes when he was particularly content, though neither adult seemed aware they shared this habit. The piano lessons became another opportunity for orchestrated encounters. Miss Caroline, who had been Quinn's friend and was now Zoe's trusted instructor, proved an unexpected ally in Operation Cupid. Her understanding of the situation seemed almost intuitive, as if Quinn herself had whispered suggestions from heaven. "Your mother loved this piece," Miss Caroline told Zoe during one lesson, her voice carrying clearly to where both Timothy and Sadie lingered nearby. "She always said it was like falling in love, starting soft and uncertain, then growing more confident with each note." Zoe watched her father's steps slow in the hallway, saw how Sadie's hands stilled on the sheet music she was organizing. The piece in question was Debussy's Clair de Lune, and Zoe had been practicing it secretly with Miss Caroline for weeks. "Maybe we could all go to the symphony together," Miss Caroline suggested casually. "They're performing Debussy next month. It would be educational for Zoe to hear it played professionally." The suggestion hung in the air like crystal notes, met with awkward glances and mumbled agreements. Exactly as Zoe had hoped. She'd mentioned to Miss Caroline earlier that the symphony would be perfect, dark, romantic, and requiring them to sit close together for several hours. Brooklyn's mother continued to provide expert guidance, though she remained unaware of her role in Operation Cupid. "The key to any romance," she'd told the girls over cookies one afternoon, "is creating opportunities for connection. Sometimes love just needs a little nudge in the right direction." Armed with this professional wisdom, Zoe and Brooklyn orchestrated a series of coincidences that forced Timothy and Sadie to interact more frequently. They convinced the school secretary to call Timothy instead of Sadie when Zoe claimed to have a stomachache, ensuring both adults would rush to her side only to find her miraculously recovered once they were both present. "I just needed both of you," Zoe explained innocently, watching their shared look of concern melt into something softer. The upcoming charity gala provided another perfect opportunity. Brooklyn's mother, chatting with Sadie at school pickup, mentioned that the event, where Timothy would be receiving an award, required a +1. "It's tradition," she said with a wink at the girls. "No exceptions, even for busy CEOs." The suggestion sent ripples through the household. Timothy, who usually attended such events alone, found himself lingering in the kitchen one morning after Zoe had conveniently excused herself. "The gala," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "It's rather important for the company." Sadie kept her eyes on the coffee she was preparing, though Zoe, peeking around the corner, noticed how her hands trembled slightly. "Yes. Would you consider, that is, would you be willing to attend? For Zoe's sake, of course. She's being recognized for her fundraising efforts at school, and she should have someone there to support her while I'm handling the business aspects." "For Zoe," Sadie echoed softly, finally meeting his eyes. "Of course." From her hiding spot, Zoe did a silent victory dance. Phase 1 of Operation Cupid was proceeding exactly as planned. Now, she just had to convince her father that the perfectly tailored blue suit would match Sadie's eyes, and ensure that Sadie wore the elegant silver dress she'd seen while, accidentally, browsing through Sadie's tablet history. That evening, as Zoe updated her operation notebook, she felt a warm certainty that her mother would approve of all her matchmaking efforts. Quinn had always told stories about fate and destiny, about how love finds a way when hearts are ready. Looking at the photograph on her nightstand, Quinn radiant in her wedding dress, Timothy gazing at her with pure adoration, Zoe knew she was helping fate along. "Just wait, Mom," she whispered to the picture. "They're almost ready. They just need a little more help seeing what's right in front of them. In the guest house, Sadie stood before her closet, fingers trailing over the silver dress she'd been admiring online but hadn't planned to buy. Now, with the gala looming and Timothy's invitation echoing in her mind, she found herself reconsidering. The fabric caught the evening light like moonlight on water, reminding her of the way Timothy's eyes softened when he looked at her sometimes, when he thought no one would notice. Meanwhile, in his study, Timothy absently adjusted his tie, remembering how Sadie had straightened it for him last week, her touch leaving an impression that lingered long after she'd stepped away. The blue suit hung ready for the gala, chosen because Zoe had innocently mentioned how it matched the color of dawn, just like Sadie's favorite time of day, Daddy. And in her room, Zoe smiled at the ceiling, knowing that Operation Cupid was far from over, but feeling confident that love, real, lasting, family-building love, was worth all the scheming in the world. After all, she had inherited her mother's romantic heart and her father's strategic mind. What better combination could there be for a matchmaker in training? She added one final note to her purple notebook before sleep claimed her. Remember what Mom always said. Love is like music. Sometimes it needs someone to turn the pages at just the right moment, and sometimes that someone is an 8-year-old with a plan. Chapter 5. Obstacles and Doubts. The silver dress hung in Sadie's closet like a question mark, its fabric catching the early morning light that streamed through her window in the guest house. She traced her fingers along the delicate beading, remembering the way Timothy's voice had softened when he asked her to attend the gala. For Zoe's sake, he'd said, but something in his eyes had suggested other reasons left unspoken. Eloise Raymond's voice cut through her reverie, sharp as crystal. The family matriarch had arrived early for her weekly inspection of the household, and her disapproving tone carried clearly across the garden that separated the main house from Sadie's sanctuary. Really, Timothy, I don't understand why you insist on maintaining this arrangement. Zoe is far too old for a nanny now, and people are beginning to talk. Sadie's hand dropped from the dress as if burned. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the morning air carried every word through her partially open window. What people, Mother? Timothy's voice held a note of weariness that made Sadie's heart ache. The same ones who questioned my ability to raise Zoe alone after Quinn passed. That was different, Eloise insisted. You needed help then, but now, the girl has grown attached, and I've seen the way you look at her, Timothy. Have you forgotten who you are, what the Raymond name means in this community? Sadie sank onto her bed, the springs creaking softly under her weight. She'd known this conversation was coming, had dreaded it since the first time she caught herself watching Timothy too long, laughing too freely at his jokes, caring too deeply about his happiness. In the main house, Zoe pressed herself against the study door, straining to hear her grandmother's words while clutching her Operation Cupid notebook to her chest. This wasn't part of her plan. Grandmother Eloise was supposed to be at her bridge club this morning, not here throwing wrenches into carefully laid schemes. I know exactly who I am, Mother. Timothy's voice grew stronger, taking on the tone he used in board meetings. I'm a father who wants the best for his daughter. Sadie has been... Convenient? Eloise supplied coolly. Yes, I'm sure she has been. But convenience can breed complacency, darling. You should be thinking about Zoe's future, about maintaining the connections that will ensure her place in society. What about Caroline Mitchell's daughter? She's recently divorced, comes from an excellent family, and actually understands our world. The silence that followed felt endless. In her room, Zoe scribbled furiously in her notebook. Emergency update. Grandmother trying to ruin everything. Wants Daddy to date some boring lady instead. Need new plan fast. Meanwhile, Sadie moved through her morning routine mechanically, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. She'd always known this was temporary, this beautiful borrowed life with the Raymonds, but somewhere along the way, she'd let herself forget, had allowed herself to dream of permanence. The sound of footsteps on her porch made her jump. Through the window she saw Zoe, still in her pajamas, hair wild from sleep or worry. "Don't listen to grandmother," Zoe burst out as soon as Sadie opened the door. "She doesn't understand. You're not convenient. You're necessary." The simple conviction in her voice brought tears to Sadie's eyes. "Oh, sweetie," she pulled Zoe into a tight hug. "It's more complicated than that." "No, it's not," Zoe insisted, her voice muffled against Sadie's shoulder. "You love us, and we love you. That's all that matters." But it wasn't all that mattered, as the day would prove. The morning's tension followed them like a shadow. When Sadie entered the main house to start breakfast, she found Timothy already in the kitchen, coffee brewing, his tie slightly crooked in a way that made her fingers itch to fix it. "About what my mother said," he began, but Sadie cut him off gently. "Mr. Raymond, Timothy, please. You don't need to explain. She's not entirely wrong. Zoe is getting older, and perhaps it's time to discuss more appropriate arrangements." The coffee maker beeped into the heavy silence that followed. Timothy's hands gripped the counter edge until his knuckles whitened. "Is that what you want?" Before Sadie could answer, Zoe burst into the kitchen, her school uniform slightly askew. "I forgot. I need to bring cookies for the class party today. We promised last week." The domestic crisis temporarily derailed the conversation as Sadie and Timothy worked together to assemble emergency chocolate chip cookies from scratch. Their movements around the kitchen were practiced, intimate, a dance learned over years of shared mornings and midnight snack preparations. But now, each accidental touch felt charged with new meaning, every shared glance weighted with questions neither dared to ask. When their fingers brushed as they reached for the same measuring cup, Sadie jerked back as if shocked, flour dusting the air between them. Throughout the day, doubt crept through the household like ivy, taking root in every quiet moment. Timothy cancelled 2 meetings, unable to focus on quarterly reports when his mind kept wandering to the way Sadie's voice changed when she read Zoe bedtime stories, or how empty the house had felt on the rare weekends she took off. In her classroom, Zoe could barely concentrate on her lessons. During recess, she and Brooklyn huddled under their usual tree, reviewing the situation with the gravity of generals planning battle strategy. "My mom says love stories always have obstacles," Brooklyn offered wisely. "It makes the happy ending better." "But what if there isn't a happy ending?" Zoe voiced her deepest fear. "What if grandmother ruins everything?" "Then we'll just have to be smarter than her," Brooklyn declared. "We need something big, something that will make them forget about everything else." That afternoon, Sadie picked Zoe up from school as usual, but the car ride home was quieter than normal. In the rearview mirror, she caught glimpses of Zoe's furrowed brow, so like her father's when he was deep in thought. At home, more surprises awaited. Larry, Timothy's oldest friend and business partner, had arrived unexpectedly. Through the living room window, Sadie watched him gesturing animatedly as he talked to Timothy in the garden. "The board is concerned, Tim," Larry's voice carried on the breeze. "Eloise called them this morning, mentioned something about unstable domestic arrangements affecting your judgment. You know how they are. Any hint of scandal and they start getting nervous." Timothy's laugh held no humor. "Scandal? Because I trust my daughter's caregiver? Because I've allowed someone who has helped raise Zoe to become part of our family?" "Because you're falling in love with her," Larry said bluntly, "and everyone can see it, except maybe you two." In the guest house that evening, Sadie sat at her small desk, staring at a blank resignation letter on her laptop screen. It would be better this way, she told herself. Leave before things got more complicated, before she hurt Zoe, before she damaged Timothy's reputation or career. But every time she tried to type the words, she remembered Zoe's first steps taken toward her open arms, Timothy's proud smile as he watched from the doorway. She remembered countless small moments, bandaging scraped knees, celebrating report cards, sharing quiet Sunday mornings over coffee and crossword puzzles. How did you resign from being part of a family? In his study, Timothy loosened his tie, Quinn's photograph catching his eye as it always did. "What would you do?" he whispered to her smiling image. "You always knew exactly how to handle, Mother, how to balance duty with happiness." The photograph offered no answers, but as he turned away, his gaze fell on another frame, a candid shot from last Christmas, Sadie and Zoe building a gingerbread house, both of them laughing as it collapsed. The joy in that moment was real, untainted by social expectations or class distinctions. Upstairs, Zoe lay in bed, clutching her Operation Cupid notebook and watching the lights in Sadie's guesthouse window. She'd never felt so scared, not even when she'd broken her arm last year, or when she'd gotten lost at the mall. This was different. This was about her family, about the happiness she could see right in front of her, slipping away because of things she was too young to fully understand, but old enough to know were wrong. Rolling over, she pulled out her emergency phone, the one meant only for real crises, and dialed Brooklyn's number. "Code red," she whispered when her friend answered. "We need to move up the timeline. The garden party can't wait 2 weeks. We need to do something now." As she outlined her new plan, more dramatic and risky than anything they'd attempted before, Zoe felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the same feeling she got when she looked at pictures of her mother. She chose to take it as a sign of approval. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more obstacles, and probably more disapproving words from grandmother Eloise. But tonight, in the quiet of her room, Zoe Raymond made a promise to the 2 people she loved most in the world. She would not let fear or doubt or social expectations steal their chance at happiness. After all, she was her mother's daughter and her father's heir. And Raymonds, as her grandmother so often reminded her, never gave up on something once they set their minds to it. Chapter 6. The Garden Party. The annual Raymond Technologies Garden Party transformed the already beautiful grounds into an enchanted garden. Hundreds of roses in every shade of pink and red created living walls around the lawn, their perfume heavy in the warm afternoon air. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, though the sun hadn't yet set, and classical music drifted from hidden speakers. Zoe, dressed in a pale blue party dress that matched her eyes, surveyed her domain from the second-floor window. Everything was perfect. The setting, the timing, even the weather had cooperated, providing a gloriously sunny day with just enough clouds to keep the temperature comfortable. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Sadie appeared in the doorway, and Zoe's heart leapt with satisfaction. She had helped Sadie choose the elegant emerald green dress, insisting it would be perfect for the party. The color made Sadie's brown eyes sparkle like amber in sunlight. "Almost," Zoe replied, sharing a meaningful glance with Brooklyn, who was spending the weekend to help with Operation Cupid's grand finale. "I just need to fix my hair ribbon." Below, guests were already arriving. Timothy stood at the garden entrance, every inch the successful CEO in his perfectly tailored grey suit. But Zoe noticed how his eyes kept drifting toward the house, checking the windows and doorways as if searching for someone. The plan was simple, but required precise timing. Jerry, her father's most easygoing colleague, had been unwittingly recruited through a series of carefully orchestrated conversations. He stood near the punch bowl, exactly where Zoe had suggested would be the best spot to see everything. "Ready," Brooklyn whispered, barely containing her excitement. Zoe nodded, straightening her shoulders like she'd seen her father do before important meetings. Operation Cupid. Final phase. They descended the stairs together, Sadie following a few steps behind. Just as they reached the garden doors, Zoe pretended to stumble, bumping into Jerry exactly as he lifted his full glass of punch. The dark red liquid arced through the air in slow motion, landing with perfect precision on Sadie's emerald dress. She gasped, more from surprise than distress, as Jerry apologized profusely. "Oh no!" Zoe exclaimed, managing to sound both concerned and innocent. "Daddy, Sadie needs your jacket. She can't stay in a wet dress." Timothy was already moving toward them, shrugging off his expensive suit jacket without hesitation. "Here," he said softly, draping it over Sadie's shoulders. His hands lingered a moment too long, straightening the lapels. "I'll help Sadie clean up," Zoe announced before either adult could suggest otherwise. "She can use the garden path to the house. It's much shorter than going around front." The garden path wound through the rose arbor, strategically lit with thousands of tiny lights. Brooklyn had helped arrange extra flowers along this route just that morning, creating what she called, with all her 10-year-old romantic wisdom, a tunnel of love. As Zoe led Sadie toward the path, she gave Jerry their prearranged signal. On cue, he approached Timothy with an urgent business question, casually maneuvering him toward the same path from a different angle. The timing was perfect. Just as Sadie and Timothy would meet in the middle of the rose arbor, the orchestra would begin playing Clair de Lune. Zoe had slipped the conductor an extra request, claiming it was her mother's favorite song. But even the best-laid plans can go awry. Just as Timothy rounded the corner into the arbor, a familiar voice cut through the gentle murmur of the party. "Timothy, darling." Jade Montgomery, Timothy's ex-girlfriend from college and Eloise's preferred candidate for his second wife, sashayed through the crowd. Her red dress seemed designed to draw every eye, her blonde hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. Zoe's heart dropped. This wasn't part of the plan. Grandmother Eloise must have invited her, another attempt to interfere with Operation Cupid. But before Jade could reach them, something unexpected happened. Timothy, seeing Sadie ahead in the arbor, his jacket draped over her shoulders and roses framing her like a Renaissance painting, didn't even glance at Jade. Instead, he quickened his steps, closing the distance between himself and Sadie as if drawn by an invisible thread. They met in the heart of the arbor, just as the first notes of Debussy floated through the air. Jade's voice faded into background noise, drowned out by the music and the gentle rustle of rose petals in the breeze. "I suppose I should change," Sadie said softly, making no move to continue down the path. "You look beautiful," Timothy replied, his voice rough with emotion, "even covered in punch." From their hiding spot behind a particularly large rosebush, Zoe and Brooklyn held their breath. This was it, the romantic moment they'd worked so hard to create. But before Timothy could say more, before the magic of the moment could fully take hold, Eloise's voice shattered the spell. "Timothy, the board members are asking for you, and Jade has come all this way to see you." Reality crashed back in. Sadie stepped away first, her cheeks flushed. "I really should change," she murmured, hurrying down the path toward the house. Timothy watched her go, his mother's voice and Jade's tinkling laugh creating a discordant accompaniment to the Debussy still playing in the background. In their rosebush hiding spot, Zoe fought back tears of frustration. "It was perfect," she whispered to Brooklyn. "Everything was perfect. Why did they have to ruin it?" But Brooklyn, whose mother had taught her well about love stories, squeezed her friend's hand. "Look at your dad's face," she whispered back. "He's not even listening to them. He's still watching where Sadie went." She was right. Timothy stood in the rose arbor, ignoring his mother's calls and Jade's attempts at conversation, staring down the path where Sadie had disappeared. and in his eyes was a look Zoe recognized from old photographs, the same way he used to look at her mother. Maybe, Zoe thought, watching her father finally turn away to rejoin the party, the garden party plan hadn't failed after all. Maybe it had shown them exactly what they needed to see, that even with all the obstacles, all the expectations and complications, their hearts knew what they wanted. Operation Cupid wasn't over yet, not while Zoe Raymond had anything to say about it. Chapter 7. Truth and Consequences. The morning after the garden party dawned grey and misty, as if the weather itself reflected the mood in the Raymond household. Timothy sat in his study, coffee growing cold on his desk, staring at the garden where just yesterday everything had almost changed. The rose arbor was still beautiful, but now it seemed to mock him with possibilities lost. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Daddy?" Zoe stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. "Can we talk?" Timothy's heart clenched at her expression, so much like Quinn's, when she had something important to say. "Of course, Princess, come here." But instead of climbing into his lap as she usually did, Zoe perched on the edge of his desk, facing him with surprising gravity. "I have to tell you something. You might be mad." "I doubt that's possible," he said softly, but Zoe shook her head. "The punch wasn't an accident," she confessed in a rush. "I planned it. I planned everything. The music, the roses, the path. It was all part of Operation Cupid." Timothy blinked, trying to process this information. Operation Cupid? Zoe reached into her pajama pocket and pulled out a worn purple notebook. "I've been trying to make you and Sadie fall in love, or well, realize you're already in love. Brooklyn helped, and sort of Miss Caroline. But she didn't know it." She pushed the notebook toward him, and Timothy found himself looking at pages of careful plans, observations, and strategies, all written in his daughter's determined handwriting. "Sweetheart," he began, but Zoe wasn't finished. "I see the way you look at her, Daddy, like you used to look at Mom in the photos. And Sadie looks at you the same way when you're not watching. She makes you laugh. Real laughs, not your business dinner laughs. And she knows exactly how you like your coffee. And she keeps track of all your favorite things. And she makes our house feel like home." Tears were streaming down Zoe's face now. "But grandmother is trying to ruin everything with her fancy parties, and that horrible Jade person. And now Sadie's been in the guest house all morning and she won't come out, and it's all my fault." Timothy moved around the desk and gathered his daughter into his arms, her small body shaking with sobs. Hey, he soothed. "Nothing is ruined, and none of this is your fault." "But I meddled," Zoe hiccuped. "I tried to make things happen instead of letting them happen naturally like Brooklyn's mom says they should." "Love isn't always natural," Timothy said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. "Sometimes it needs a little help, a little courage from unexpected places." He picked up the purple notebook, flipping through pages of his daughter's matchmaking schemes. Every detail she'd noticed, every moment she'd tried to create, they were all born of love, not just for him and Sadie, but for the family she dreamed they could be. "When did you get so wise?" he asked, smiling despite the emotion thick in his throat. "Mum's genes," Zoe replied with a watery smile. "That's what Sadie always says when I figure something out, that I got Mom's clever heart." The phrase hit Timothy like a physical blow. Quinn had always said that, about puzzles, about people, about love itself. The fact that Sadie had picked up on it, had passed it on to their daughter. "Daddy?" Zoe's voice was small but determined. "Sadie's not just the help, no matter what grandmother says. She's family, and I think Mom would want us to be happy." In the guest house, Sadie sat surrounded by half-packed boxes, her hands trembling as she folded another shirt. The moment in the rose arbor played on repeat in her mind, Timothy's jacket warm around her shoulders, his eyes soft in the twilight, the music swelling around them like a scene from a movie. But then reality had intruded. as it always did. Eloise's sharp voice, Jade's perfect presence, all the reasons why this was impossible. She had crossed too many lines, gotten too comfortable, forgotten her place. A knock at her door made her jump. She expected Zoe. The girl had been texting her all morning, asking why she wasn't in the main house for breakfast. Instead, she opened the door to find Timothy, looking somewhat disheveled and clutching a familiar purple notebook. "Don't pack," he said without preamble. Sadie blinked. "What?" "The boxes," he gestured behind her. "Don't pack them. Unless you want to move into the main house instead." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Timothy, my daughter is surprisingly wise," he continued, taking a step closer. "She sees things adults try to hide, feelings we're too afraid to acknowledge, dreams we think we don't deserve." Another step. "For 8 years, you've been part of our family. You've helped raise my daughter, made our house a home, brought laughter back into our lives, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Sadie's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Your mother, the board, everyone will adjust," Timothy said firmly, "because what matters is this, our family, our happiness, our love. Quinn used to say that life is too short to let fear steal our joy. It took an 8-year-old matchmaker to help me remember that." He held out the purple notebook. "Zoe called it Operation Cupid. She's been plotting to bring us together for months. Every accident, every special moment, it was all her, trying to help us see what was right in front of us." Sadie took the notebook with trembling hands, reading the careful plans, the hopeful observations, the pure love that filled every page. "She really is her mother's daughter," she whispered. "And yours too," Timothy said softly, "if you want to be, not just as her nanny or her friend, but as her mother, as my wife, as the missing piece that makes our family complete." He reached out, brushing away her tears with gentle fingers. "I know it won't be easy. Mother will object, society will gossip, there will be obstacles, but we'll face them together as a family. If you want that." "I do want that," Sadie breathed. "I want it so much it scares me." Timothy smiled, the same soft smile Zoe had documented in her notebook as his real smile, the one only Sadie gets. "Then stop packing these boxes. Come home. Stay with us. Love us officially instead of in secret." "I already do," Sadie admitted. "Love you both. I have for so long." From the window, Zoe watched her father pull Sadie into his arms, saw their first kiss illuminated by morning sunlight. She hugged her purple notebook to her chest, heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Operation Cupid. Mission accomplished," she whispered, and somewhere she was sure her mother was smiling in approval. Later, as they sat together in the kitchen, Sadie making fresh coffee, Timothy trying to help but mostly getting in the way, Zoe perched on her usual stool, they began to plan for the challenges ahead. But now they faced them as a united front, a family chosen and fought for, bound together by love that had grown slowly, naturally, and with just a little help from a very determined 8-year-old matchmaker. Chapter 8. The Storm. Some storms come to disrupt, others to clear the air. On this particular evening, as dark clouds gathered over the Raymond estate like nature's own stage curtains, no one could have predicted how a simple power outage would change everything. The day had started with its own kind of tempest. Eloise Raymond's silver Mercedes had swept up the driveway just as the first heavy drops began to fall, her arrival as unannounced as the storm itself. News of Timothy and Sadie's relationship had spread through their social circle like lightning through summer clouds, and Eloise arrived crackling with the energy of impending thunder. Sadie watched from the guest house window as Timothy's mother emerged from her car, designer heels clicking against wet pavement with militant precision. The sound carried across the garden, a sharp counterpoint to the growing rumble of thunder. In her hands, Eloise clutched what looked suspiciously like society page clippings, no doubt filled with whispered speculation about the Raymond heir and his daughter's former nanny. "Timothy Alexander Raymond," Eloise's voice carried through the halls of the main house. "Have you completely lost your mind?" But before she could launch into what was undoubtedly a carefully prepared speech about family reputation and social standing, nature intervened. A massive crack of thunder shook the windows, rattling the crystal chandelier that had hung in the foyer since Quinn's grandmother's time. The power flickered once, twice, like a warning, then plunged the entire house into darkness. In the sudden silence that followed, Zoe's delighted laugh echoed from the kitchen. "Perfect timing," she declared, her voice carrying the same joyful defiance Quinn had been known for. "Now we can have a candlelight family night, like we used to during storms." Timothy, who had been bracing for his mother's tirade, felt the tension in his shoulders ease at his daughter's enthusiasm. "Sadie, do you remember where we keep the emergency kit?" "Hall closet, second shelf," Sadie replied, automatically, already moving in that direction. She had organized that closet herself years ago, making sure everything essential was easily accessible even in the dark. Her fingers found the emergency lantern with practiced ease, its soft glow illuminating the space between them all like a peace offering. Eloise watched with narrowed eyes as Sadie efficiently distributed flashlights and began setting up battery-operated lanterns around the living room. Each movement spoke of intimate familiarity with the house and its inhabitants, knowledge earned through years of dedicated care. "Really, Timothy," Eloise's voice cut through the darkness, "this is hardly the time for games. We need to discuss damage control before this gets out of hand." Another thunderclap punctuated her words, and the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like nature's own percussion section. The storm seemed to be speaking for them all, expressing the turbulent emotions none dared voice. Zoe appeared with an armful of board games, her eyes bright with the kind of wisdom that sometimes shows itself in children. "Grandmother, you can play with us. Sadie always lets me win at Monopoly, but Daddy says that's not teaching me proper business skills." "I do not let you win," Sadie protested with a laugh, setting up one of the lanterns on the coffee table. The warm light caught the highlights in her hair, reminding Timothy of how Quinn's used to glow in similar lighting. "You're just surprisingly cutthroat for an 8-year-old. "Quinn's genes," Timothy said softly, and for once Eloise didn't flinch at the mention of her late daughter-in-law. Instead, she watched as Timothy helped Sadie arrange cushions on the floor around the coffee table, noting how naturally they moved together, how Sadie anticipated his actions and complimented them without words. "At least sit in a proper chair, Timothy," Eloise sighed, but there was less bite in her tone. "You're not a child." "Tonight, I am," he replied, settling onto a cushion beside Sadie. The storm had created a strange bubble of intimacy, making the vast living room feel cozy and contained. "Come on, Mother. When was the last time you played Monopoly?" Perhaps it was the storm's influence, creating a world where normal rules seemed suspended. Perhaps it was the way Zoe looked so much like Quinn, as she carefully counted out the play money, her face serious with concentration. Or perhaps it was simply time for walls to begin crumbling. Whatever the reason, Eloise found herself perching on the edge of the sofa, accepting a player token from her granddaughter's outstretched hand. As the evening progressed, the storm outside seemed to mirror the emotional climate within. There were moments of intense drama, like when Eloise landed on Timothy's hotel-laden Park Place and had to mortgage her properties to stay in the game. There were lulls of peaceful conversation, punctuated by occasional rumbles of distant thunder. And there were unexpected moments of connection, like when Sadie mentioned she'd learned to play Monopoly in the hospital where she volunteered, teaching long-term pediatric patients. "That's where I first met Quinn," Eloise said suddenly, surprising everyone. The lantern light softened her features, making her look younger, more vulnerable. She was volunteering in the children's ward, reading stories. She had such a gentle way with the little ones. Sadie's hands stilled on the dice. "I didn't know that." "Yes, well," Eloise straightened her already perfect posture, but something had shifted in her expression. She believed in giving back to the community, not just writing checks, but actually connecting with people, making a difference in their lives. "Like Sadie does with me," Zoe piped up, counting her dwindling stack of money. "She doesn't just take care of me. She teaches me things, important things." "Like what?" Eloise asked, and for the first time there was genuine curiosity in her voice rather than challenge. "Like how to be brave even when you're scared. And how love isn't just about saying the words, it's about showing up every day and choosing to care. And that sometimes the best families are the ones we build ourselves." The wisdom in Zoe's words hung in the candlelit air like incense in a cathedral. Timothy reached for Sadie's hand under the coffee table, squeezing it gently. Eloise watched this gesture, her expression unreadable in the flickering light. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, making them all jump. Zoe abandoned her properties and scooted closer to Sadie, who automatically wrapped an arm around her. The gesture was so maternal, so natural, that even Eloise seemed moved. "Perhaps," she said carefully, setting down her player token, "we should discuss this situation, rationally, over tea." "The power's still out, Mother," Timothy reminded her. "We have a camping stove in the emergency kit," Sadie offered. "I could heat some water." To everyone's surprise, Eloise nodded. Yes, that would be acceptable. As Sadie moved toward the kitchen, Timothy following with a lantern, Zoe turned to her grandmother. "Did you know Sadie makes tea exactly the way Mom used to, with honey and a tiny bit of lemon?" "No," Eloise said softly. "I didn't know that." "There's probably a lot you don't know about her," Zoe continued, beginning to pack away the game pieces with methodical care. "Like how she keeps all my baby pictures organized in albums, or how she learned to make Daddy's favorite cookies from his childhood nanny, or how she sits with me sometimes at Mom's grave and helps me tell her about my day." Eloise was quiet for a long moment, watching the candlelight dance across her granddaughter's determined face. Outside, the storm began to ease, as if sensing the thawing of frozen hearts within. "You love her very much, don't you?" "As much as I love Mom," Zoe said simply. "Different, but just as much. And Daddy does too. He smiles more now, real smiles. Isn't that what Mom would want?" In the kitchen, Timothy and Sadie worked together by lantern light, their movements synchronized by years of shared domesticity. The storm's fury had diminished to a gentle rain, its rhythm soothing like a lullaby. "Your mother might surprise us," he murmured, passing Sadie the tea canister. "She loves you," Sadie replied, measuring leaves with practiced care. "And Zoe, she wants you to be happy." "We are happy," Timothy said firmly. "Together, all of us." When they returned to the living room with a tray of steaming teacups, they found Eloise helping Zoe set up another board game, Scrabble this time. The storm outside was beginning to fade, but none of them moved to check if the power had returned. Instead, they settled around the coffee table again, passing teacups and sharing words, both on the board and in careful conversation. The candles burned lower, casting soft shadows on the walls, but the atmosphere had changed. Something had shifted, like the calm after a storm when the air is cleaner, fresher, full of possibility. Later, after Zoe had fallen asleep on the couch and Eloise had departed with a surprisingly civil goodbye, Timothy and Sadie stood at the window watching the clouds clear. Stars began to peek through the breaking clouds, like diamond pins in black velvet. "That went better than expected," Sadie ventured, her reflection in the window overlapping with the emerging night sky. Mother always did have a weakness for a good game of Monopoly, Timothy smiled, pulling her close, and for people who genuinely care about her family. I do, Sadie whispered, care about them, all of them. I know. Timothy pressed a kiss to her temple. That's why this will work. Storm or no storm, we face it together. On the couch, Zoe smiled in her sleep, dreaming of candlelight and board games, of families built and bridges mended, of love that could weather any storm. And somewhere, perhaps riding the last whispers of the passing storm, Quinn's spirit seemed to linger, blessing this new chapter in their family's story with the gentle peace that follows every tempest. Chapter 9. Family Ties. Timothy's brother Alexander had always been the family rebel. While Timothy followed their father's footsteps into business, Alexander had chosen to become a pediatrician, marrying Maria, a nurse he met during his residency. Now, as they sat in Timothy's study, hearing about recent events, their outsider perspective proved invaluable. "You're overthinking this, Tim," Alexander said, lounging in one of the leather chairs while his wife Maria perched on the armrest. "The board will adjust. They adjusted when I decided not to join the company. They adjusted when you became a single father, and they'll adjust to this." "It's different," Timothy protested, but Maria cut him off with a gentle laugh. "Is it, or are you just letting mother's prejudices cloud your judgment?" She reached for her husband's hand, their wedding rings catching the late afternoon light. Sometimes the best families are the ones that break the rules. In the kitchen, Zoe sat with her aunt and uncle's children, her cousins Emma and Lucas, sharing her secret matchmaking journal and plotting her next move. At 13, Emma fancied herself a romance expert, thanks to her extensive collection of young adult novels, while 10-year-old Lucas offered surprisingly practical suggestions. "You need to show everyone how perfect they are together," Emma declared. "Like with pictures and stuff. Mom and Dad have this awesome anniversary video that makes everyone cry." Zoe's eyes lit up. "A slideshow. We have so many pictures from over the years. And videos too." "We can help," Lucas volunteered. "I'm really good with the computer since Dad got me that new editing program." The children's enthusiasm caught Maria's attention as she passed through the kitchen. She paused, listening to their plans, then smiled. "Why don't we make it a proper presentation? Your father's birthday dinner is next week. We could invite the whole family, including the board members Uncle Timothy is worried about." Zoe launched herself at her aunt, hugging her tightly. "Really? You'll help?" "Of course," Maria winked. "Us rebels have to stick together." The next week flew by in a flurry of secret preparation. Alexander and Maria's family stayed in town, officially to celebrate Timothy's birthday, but really to help with what they dubbed Operation Family Album. Every evening after Timothy left for work, they gathered in the media room, sorting through years of photographs and home videos. Sadie tried to excuse herself from these sessions, feeling awkward about seeing herself so prominently featured in the family's memories, but Maria wouldn't hear of it. "Look at this one," she insisted, holding up a photo from 3 years ago. It showed Sadie teaching Zoe to bake cookies, both of them covered in flour and laughing. In the background, Timothy could be seen watching them with an expression of pure contentment. "This isn't just a cute moment, this is family. Real, messy, beautiful family." The night of the dinner arrived clear and cool. Timothy, still unaware of the planned presentation, had agreed to host the party at home rather than at a restaurant. The formal dining room gleamed with candlelight, the table set with Quinn's favorite china, a detail Sadie had remembered and Eloise had noticed with quiet approval. Board members arrived with their spouses, their initial awkwardness at seeing Sadie in a hostess role fading as they watched her effortless management of the evening. She moved through the room with grace, ensuring everyone's comfort while somehow staying attuned to Timothy's every need. "She's good at this," Larry, Timothy's oldest friend and board member, muttered to his wife. "Better than Jade ever was at those corporate functions." After the main course, Alexander stood, tapping his glass for attention. "As the younger brother, I've always enjoyed embarrassing Tim whenever possible. Tonight is no exception. However, I've had some help preparing this particular embarrassment." The lights dimmed, and a projector screen lowered from the ceiling, another of Lucas's technical contributions. Music began to play softly. Claire de Lune, Zoe's Choice, as the first image appeared. It started with a photograph of baby Zoe in the hospital, tiny and perfect in her father's arms. Then came Sadie's arrival, young and nervous, but already showing the warmth that would become her hallmark. The images flowed together, first steps captured on video, birthday parties, quiet moments of homework help, family vacations where Sadie had initially gone as Zoe's nanny, but clearly became more. "Some families are born," Zoe's voice narrated over the montage. "Some families are made. And sometimes, if we're really lucky, they're both." The presentation continued, showing the gradual transformation of their household. Timothy's smile appearing more frequently, Sadie becoming less self-conscious in family photos, Zoe blossoming under their shared care, holiday celebrations, school events, ordinary moments made extraordinary by the love evident in every frame. "8 years ago," Zoe's voice continued, "I lost my mum before I ever got to know her. But Mom must have been watching over us because she sent us Sadie. Not to replace her, no one could ever do that, but to help us become a family again." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as the final sequence played, candid shots from recent months showing the undeniable love growing between Timothy and Sadie, all captured through Zoe's observant lens. The last image was from the garden party, the moment in the rose arbor when they thought no one was watching. "Love isn't just about romance," Zoe concluded. "It's about choice. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other over and over. That's what makes a family. And that's what Sadie has done for 8 years. Chosen us, loved us, made us whole again." The lights came up to reveal Zoe standing at the front of the room, her purple notebook clutched to her chest. "I know some people think it's not proper or traditional," she addressed the board members directly, her voice clear despite her nervousness. "But look at these pictures. Look at our family. How can love like this ever be wrong?" Timothy rose from his seat, moved beyond words, and gathered his daughter into his arms. Sadie remained frozen in her chair until Maria gently nudged her forward. As she joined them, Timothy pulled her into their embrace. The room erupted in applause, led, surprisingly, by Eloise herself. She stood regally, tears glistening in her eyes, and raised her glass. "To family," she announced, "in all its beautiful, unexpected forms." Larry was the first board member to stand and join the toast. Others followed, any remaining resistance crumbling in the face of such obvious love and devotion. Even the most conservative members couldn't deny the evidence they'd just witnessed. Years of dedication, love, and family bonds that transcended traditional definitions. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Zoe had been tucked into bed, Timothy found Sadie in the media room, re-watching parts of the presentation. "She's amazing," Sadie whispered as he sat beside her. "To see it all like this, every moment, every memory." "She's her mother's daughter," Timothy smiled. "Quinn always said love was about paying attention to the little things. Zoe certainly got that gene." "And her father's determination," Sadie added, leaning into his embrace. "Once a Raymond sets their mind to something." "Speaking of which," Timothy shifted to face her, taking her hands in his. "Seeing our life together like that, hearing Zoe's words, I don't want to wait anymore. Marry me, Sadie. Not because of the board or mother or anyone else. Marry me because we're already a family, and it's time we made it official." Sadie's answer was interrupted by a squeal from the doorway. they turned to find Zoe, supposedly in bed, doing a victory dance. "Operation Cupid! Complete success!" she declared, waving her purple notebook triumphantly. As they laughed and pulled her into their embrace, Sadie whispered her yes, not just to Timothy, but to both of them, to this family they'd built together, to love in all its unexpected and beautiful forms. Chapter 10. Taking Chances. Larry Peterson had known Timothy Raymond for 25 years, since they were roommates at business school. He'd been there through everything: Timothy's whirlwind romance with Quinn, their struggle to conceive, the devastating loss, and the years of quiet grief that followed. Now, watching his oldest friend pace nervously in his office, Larry couldn't help but smile. "Tim, you're already engaged to the woman. Don't you think you're overthinking this first date thing?" "It needs to be perfect," Timothy insisted, running a hand through his perfectly groomed hair. "We've never had a proper date. Everything's been family dinners and school events and stolen moments. She deserves romance." "She deserves you being yourself," Larry countered, leaning back in his chair. "That's who she fell in love with, not some grand romantic gesture version of you." But Timothy wasn't listening. He was too busy checking his phone, where Zoe had been sending detailed suggestions all morning. His daughter had taken charge of date planning with the same determination she'd applied to Operation Cupid, and her ideas were surprisingly sophisticated for an 8-year-old. Back at home, Zoe sat cross-legged on Sadie's bed in the guest house, watching her try on outfits. "The blue dress," she declared with authority. "Daddy loves you in blue. He told Uncle Alexander it reminds him of the sky right before sunset." Sadie paused, holding the dress in question. "He said that?" "Mm-hmm. And you should wear your hair down. He likes it when it's all curly and free, like when we go to the beach. You've been paying very close attention, haven't you?" Sadie sat beside Zoe, smoothing her hand over the blue fabric. "That's what Mom used to say, that love is about paying attention to the little things." Zoe leaned her head against Sadie's shoulder. "I think that's why you and Daddy are perfect together. You both notice everything about each other." In his office, Timothy was still planning. Larry watched him with fond exasperation as he confirmed reservations, checked weather reports, and coordinated with what seemed like half the city to ensure everything would be perfect. "Remember your first date with Quinn?" Larry asked suddenly. Timothy paused his planning. "Of course. I had this elaborate evening planned, 5-star restaurant, symphony, moonlit walk through the botanical gardens. But my car broke down, we got caught in the rain, and ended up eating hamburgers at that little diner near campus. And she loved it," Larry reminded him, "because it was real, because when everything went wrong, you both just laughed and made the best of it. That's what Sadie loves about you too, not the CEO, not the perfect planner, but the man who can laugh when things go sideways." The wisdom in these words finally seemed to reach Timothy. He sank into his chair, loosening his tie slightly. I want to give her everything, Larry. She's given us so much. Given me back my life, my joy, given Zoe the mother she needed." "Then give her you," Larry said simply. "The real you. The one who dances badly to oldies music when he thinks no one's watching. The one who still gets excited about model airplanes. The one who's been falling in love with her slowly for 8 years. Meanwhile, Sadie was having similar doubts. "What if it's awkward?" she confessed to Maria, who had arrived to help with hair and makeup. "We've never been alone together like this, not really. It's always been about Zoe, about the family." "That's exactly why it won't be awkward," Maria assured her, expertly pinning back one curl. "You already know each other, really know each other. This is just adding a new chapter to your story." Zoe, who had been quiet for a moment, suddenly brightened. "I have an idea." She dashed out of the room, returning moments later with her purple notebook. "Here's everything I've noticed about what makes Daddy happy. And everything that makes you smile, Sadie. I've been taking notes for months." The women leaned in to read the careful observations. Daddy smiles biggest when Sadie hums while cooking. Sadie laughs most at Daddy's terrible science jokes. They both love the old black and white movies that put me to sleep. Daddy relaxes when Sadie fixes his tie. Sadie glows when Daddy remembers her favorite flowers. They both tap their fingers to jazz music. Neither of them likes olives, but they always order them for each other. The list went on, pages of small moments and shared quirks that painted a picture of two people who had fallen in love in the quiet spaces between responsibilities and routines. As evening approached, the house buzzed with preparation energy. Timothy had returned home early to get ready, and Zoe appointed herself coordinator between her father's room and the guest house, running messages back and forth with the importance of a diplomatic courier. "Daddy wants to know if 7 o'clock is still good," she announced, bouncing into Sadie's room. "And he says you don't need to be nervous because he's nervous enough for both of you, but I wasn't supposed to tell you that part." Sadie laughed, some of her tension easing. This was Timothy, her Timothy, who left his coffee cups all over the house and could recite business reports from memory, but constantly lost his reading glasses. The man who had watched her grow from a teenager into a woman, who had trusted her with his most precious treasure, who had seen her at her best and worst, and loved her through it all. At precisely 7 o'clock, Timothy stood at the guest house door, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hands. Not roses or orchids, but the same kind that grew in Sadie's mother's garden, the ones she'd once mentioned missing during a late-night conversation years ago. When she opened the door, time seemed to stop. The blue dress caught the last rays of sunset, her curls falling exactly as Zoe had suggested, but it was her smile that took his breath away, bright and real, and just a little nervous. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he replied, suddenly feeling like a teenager on his first date. From the main house window, Zoe watched with satisfaction as her father offered Sadie his arm. She'd stationed Brooklyn as a lookout at the front gate, ready to report every detail of their departure. "Operation First Date is officially underway," she whispered into her walkie-talkie. "A gift from Uncle Alexander for this specific purpose." "They're getting in the car," Brooklyn's voice crackled back. "Your dad opened her door first. Very gentlemanlike." "Oh, he just dropped something. It looks like... Wait, is that your purple notebook?" Zoe grinned. She'd slipped her operation notes into her father's jacket pocket earlier, knowing he might need the reminder of all the little things that made their love special. In the car, Timothy found himself relaxing as Sadie immediately tuned the radio to their favorite jazz station. When she reached over to straighten his slightly crooked tie, they both laughed, remembering Zoe's list. "So," Sadie said as they drove, "where are we going?" Timothy smiled mysteriously. "How do you feel about hamburgers?" Her eyes lit up with understanding. Larry had obviously shared the story of his first date with Quinn, but somehow this felt right. They weren't trying to recreate the past or follow anyone else's romantic script. They were writing their own story, one that had begun 8 years ago with a grieving father, a teenage nanny, and a baby girl who needed them both. As they drove into the sunset, Zoe curled up in her favorite window seat with her notebook and began a new entry. Operation First Date, Success. Because sometimes the best love stories don't need elaborate plans. They just need two hearts ready to take a chance on happiness. The evening stretched ahead of them, full of promise and possibility, but both Timothy and Sadie knew the most important part of their love story was waiting at home, an 8-year-old matchmaker who had seen the potential for joy long before they'd admitted it to themselves. Chapter 11. coming together. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the kitchen counter as Sadie prepared breakfast, her engagement ring catching the light with every movement. 3 weeks had passed since Timothy's proposal, and while most of the business world had adjusted to the news, the neighborhood gossips were still having a field day. Anna Mitchell, self-appointed social guardian of their exclusive community, had taken it upon herself to warn every mutual acquaintance about the scandalous situation. A nanny, she would whisper over tennis matches and charity luncheons. And so young! What could Timothy Raymond be thinking? But on this particular morning, as Anna Power walked past the Raymond estate for the 3rd time, hoping to gather more fodder for her gossip mill, she witnessed a scene that would later leave her uncharacteristically speechless. Through the large kitchen windows, she could see the family going about their morning routine. Timothy stood at the counter, attempting to help with breakfast, but mostly just stealing bits of fruit from the cutting board. Zoe sat at the island, simultaneously eating her cereal and explaining something with dramatic hand gestures. And Sadie moved between them, her actions so natural and fluid, it was as if she'd been born to fill that space. What struck Anna most wasn't the domesticity of the scene, it was the joy. Pure, unfiltered happiness radiated from the kitchen like sunlight, warming even her cynical heart. Inside, unaware of their audience, the family continued their morning dance. "Miss Caroline says I'm ready for the winter recital," Zoe announced, milk dribbling down her chin. "Can I play Mum's favorite piece?" "Of course, sweetheart," Timothy replied, exchanging a warm glance with Sadie. "Your mother would love that. And can we have a special dinner after? With everyone, Uncle Alexander and Aunt Maria and the cousins and grandmother and Brooklyn's family?" "That sounds perfect," Sadie said, deftly preventing Timothy from stealing another strawberry. "We can use the good china, make it a real celebration." The mention of celebrations brought a familiar gleam to Zoe's eye. "Speaking of celebrations," she began, pulling out her ever-present purple notebook, "I have some ideas for the wedding." Timothy groaned playfully. "Zoe, sweetheart, we just got engaged. There's no rush." "There's always a rush when it comes to love," Zoe declared with 8-year-old wisdom. "Besides, I've been planning this way longer than you have." She wasn't wrong. The notebook contained detailed wedding plans dating back months, including color schemes, flower arrangements, and a meticulously curated guest list that somehow managed to balance family politics with genuine sentiment. "Look," she flipped to a particularly detailed page, "we can have the ceremony in the garden, right where you had your almost kiss at the party. And we can use Mum's favorite flowers mixed with Sadie's favorites, so it's like both of you are part of it." The thoughtfulness of this suggestion brought tears to Sadie's eyes. She abandoned her breakfast preparations to hug Zoe tightly. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Your mum would love that idea." "She would," Timothy agreed softly. "Quinn always said gardens were where love grew best." The tender moment was interrupted by the doorbell. Larry stood on the porch, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Tim, we need to talk. The board, ... But before he could finish, voices drifted up from the street. Anna Mitchell's distinctive tone carrying clearly through the morning air. "It's just not proper. Think of what it's doing to poor little Zoe, having her nanny try to replace her mother." Larry's face darkened, but Timothy held up a hand. "Let me handle this." He walked out onto the front lawn, where Anna was holding court with 2 other neighborhood women. "Good morning, ladies," he said pleasantly. "I couldn't help but overhear your concern for my daughter's welfare." Anna had the grace to flush slightly, but she rallied quickly. "Timothy, dear, we're just worried about appearances. The community has certain standards." "Yes, standards." Timothy's voice remained calm, but took on an edge of steel. "Like kindness, acceptance, understanding that love doesn't always follow conventional paths. Those standards? But surely you must see how it looks." Anna protested. "A man of your position marrying the help." "I'm marrying the woman who helped heal my family," Timothy corrected her. "The woman who has loved my daughter as her own for 8 years, who has brought joy back into our home, who has chosen us every single day without asking for anything in return." "If that doesn't meet your standards, Anna, perhaps it's the standards that need to change." From the doorway, Sadie watched with her heart in her throat. Zoe slipped her small hand into Sadie's, squeezing tightly. "You tell her, Daddy," she whispered. Larry, who had moved to stand supportively behind Timothy, added his own perspective. "As chairman of the board at Raymond Technologies, I can assure you that Mr. Raymond's personal happiness has only enhanced his professional performance. Our stock has never been higher, our employee satisfaction rates are through the roof, and our community outreach programs, many of which Sadie has helped develop, are being nationally recognized." Anna's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The other women were already backing away, suddenly remembering pressing engagements elsewhere. "Now," Timothy concluded pleasantly, "if you'll excuse us, my family is in the middle of breakfast. You're welcome to join us, Anna, if you'd like to see for yourself what real love looks like. Otherwise, I trust we can count on your discretion and support going forward." The invitation, so graciously extended despite her behavior, seemed to finally penetrate Anna's social armor. She looked past Timothy to where Sadie and Zoe stood framed in the doorway, their hands clasped, their posture protective of each other. Something in the scene, perhaps the natural way they fit together, or the obvious love in their expressions, made her pause. That is, perhaps I have been hasty in my judgments," she managed. "The garden party was lovely after all. And little Zoe has never seemed happier." "That's because I am happier," Zoe called out, unable to stay quiet any longer. "I have 2 moms now, one in heaven watching over me and one right here loving me every day. How many kids are that lucky?" The simple truth in her words seemed to drain the last of the fight from Anna. She nodded once, briefly, then turned and walked away with as much dignity as she could muster. Inside, over slightly delayed but perfectly prepared breakfast, Larry shared the real reason for his early morning visit. "The board wants to release a formal statement supporting your engagement. They think it's time to get ahead of the gossip, show that Raymond Technologies stands for modern family values." "Modern family values," Sadie repeated uncertainly. "Love, loyalty, dedication to family in all its forms," Larry explained. "Your story, it's actually incredibly powerful. A young woman who steps in to help a grieving family, dedicates 8 years to loving and nurturing a child, helps rebuild a broken home. It's beautiful, real, the kind of thing people connect with." "It's not a story," Timothy said firmly, wrapping an arm around Sadie's waist. "It's our life." "Exactly," Larry smiled. "That's what makes it perfect." As the day progressed, news of Timothy's confrontation with Anna spread through the neighborhood grapevine, but instead of the scandal she had hoped to create, a different narrative emerged. People began to share their own observations, how Sadie had always gone above and beyond at school functions, how she'd organized meal trains for sick neighbors, how she'd turned the Raymond house from a place of mourning into a home filled with laughter. By evening, several of Anna's former allies had called or stopped by to offer their congratulations. Each brought a small gift or a kind word, genuine warmth replacing artificial concern. "See," Zoe said, as she helped arrange the flowers that had begun arriving. "Love wins. It just needs a little time and a lot of courage." Sadie, watching Timothy read through Larry's draft of the board's statement, felt the last of her anxiety fade. This was where she belonged, not as the help, not as a replacement for Quinn, but as herself. A woman who had grown up alongside the family she loved, who had earned her place in their hearts through years of dedication and care. "What are you thinking?" Timothy asked, catching her contemplative expression. "That some things are worth the wait," she replied. "Worth the gossip and the judgment and all the hard parts." "Like love," he suggested, pulling her close. "Like family," she corrected, smiling as Zoe abandoned the flowers to join their embrace. Real, messy, beautiful family. Above them, caught in the last rays of sunset, Quinn's photograph seemed to glow with approval. 8 years ago, a grieving man had hired a teenage nanny, not knowing she would become the missing piece that would make their family whole again. Now, as they stood together in their kitchen, the heart of their home, it was clear that sometimes the best love stories don't follow traditional paths. Sometimes they grow slowly, nurtured by daily acts of kindness, shaped by shared grief and joy, until they become something stronger and more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 12. When Love Comes Full Circle. The Raymond Garden had never looked more enchanted. Thousands of twinkling lights created a canopy of stars overhead, while Quinn's favorite lilies intertwined with Sadie's beloved wildflowers along the aisle. The rose arbor, where their love had first nearly blossomed, now formed a perfect arch, draped in soft white fabric that caught the golden light of sunset. Inside the house, Zoe sat at her mother's piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys that had witnessed so many moments of their journey. Her dress was the exact shade of stormy blue that she'd inherited from Quinn, and a crown of lilies and wildflowers rested on her dark curls, a perfect blend of both her mothers, just like her heart. In her lap lay the purple notebook that had started it all, its pages worn with love and determination. She opened it one last time to read the letter she'd written that morning. "Dearest Mom, today is the day all my planning finally comes true. Operation Cupid is complete, but it's really just the beginning. Sadie becomes officially what she's been in our hearts for years, my second mom, Daddy's wife, our family made whole again. I used to worry that loving Sadie meant being less loyal to you, but she taught me that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. There's no limit to how much our hearts can hold. You're still my mum, still in my heart, still watching over us. Sadie didn't replace you. She helped us honor your memory by teaching us to live and love again. Remember how you used to tell Daddy that sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in unexpected packages? I think you must have known what you were doing when you sent Sadie to us. She was so young then, but so were you when you met Daddy. You both loved us before you even really knew us. I hope you're proud of us, of me, for helping Daddy and Sadie see what was right in front of them, of Daddy for being brave enough to love again, of Sadie for choosing us every single day for 8 years. Watch over us today, Mom. Send us a sign that you're happy for us. Love always, your Zoe." A warm breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of lilies and the promise of new beginnings. Zoe smiled, tucking the notebook away. That was all the sign she needed. In what had once been Quinn's dressing room, Sadie stood before the mirror while Maria and Brooklyn made final adjustments to her dress. The gown was elegantly simple, ivory silk that flowed like water with delicate lace that had once adorned Quinn's veil, a touching addition suggested by Eloise herself. "Something borrowed," Eloise had said softly, presenting the lace, "from one Raymond bride to another." The words had been a final blessing, a bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what was found. Now, Sadie's fingers traced the delicate patterns, remembering the frightened 18-year-old who had first walked through these doors. She had been so young, so uncertain, armed, with nothing but NICU volunteer experience and a desperate desire to help heal a broken family. She could never have imagined then that she wasn't just healing them. They were healing her too. "You look beautiful." Zoe's voice came from the doorway. She entered carrying something carefully wrapped in tissue paper. "But you need one more thing." Inside the package lay a simple pearl necklace. "It was Mom's," Zoe explained. "Daddy gave it to her on their first anniversary. She wrote in her diary that she hoped someday I would share it with someone who loved us as much as she did." As Maria fastened the pearls around Sadie's neck, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Eloise dabbed discreetly at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. The ceremony itself was intimate. Family and close friends gathered in the garden where their story had unfolded. Larry stood as best man, Brooklyn as junior bridesmaid beside Zoe, who had insisted on being both flower girl and official matchmaker of honor. Timothy waited beneath the rose arbor, his heart thundering in his chest. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of blue that reminded him of all their shared dawns and dusks, all the quiet moments that had built their love story piece by piece. The music began, not the traditional wedding march, but Claire de Lune, played on Quinn's piano by Miss Caroline. The guests stood, turning to watch as Zoe started down the aisle, scattering rose petals and lily petals mixed together, symbolizing the blending of past and present, of memories and new beginnings. Then Sadie appeared, and the world seemed to hold its breath. She walked alone, having chosen to give herself to this family just as she had 8 years ago. But she wasn't really alone. Not with Quinn's pearls at her throat and lace in her veil, not with Zoe beaming at her from beside the arbor, not with Timothy looking at her as if she were every dream he'd ever had coming true at once. Their vows were personal, written from hearts that had loved each other long before they'd admitted it. "Timothy," Sadie's voice trembled slightly. "8 years ago, I walked into this house as a girl who thought she was here to help a family heal. Instead, I found my own healing, my own strength, and my own family. You and Zoe taught me that love isn't about replacing what's lost. It's about growing something new in the garden of our hearts. I promise to tend that garden every day, to honor Quinn's memory while building our future together, to love you both with everything I am." Timothy had to take a moment before he could speak, emotion making his voice rough. "Sadie, you came to us when we were broken, when I thought joy was something I'd never feel again. But you didn't just take care of us, you showed us how to live again, how to laugh, how to love. You loved my daughter as your own before you ever loved me, and that alone would make you the greatest gift of my life. I promise to spend the rest of our days showing you that love multiplies, that happiness shared grows deeper, that family is about more than blood. It's about choosing each other every single day." Then it was Zoe's turn. She had insisted on having her own part in the ceremony, and now she stood between them, holding their hands. "8 years ago, I lost my first mom before I could know her. But Mom must have been watching over us because she sent us Sadie, not to replace her, no one could do that, but to help us become a family again, to show us that love has no limits. Today I promise to be the best daughter to both my mums, the one in heaven watching over us, and the one right here who has chosen us every day. And I promise to always believe in love, because look how beautifully it turned out." Just as they were pronounced husband and wife, a warm breeze swept through the arbor, showering them with rose petals. Above, the first star of evening appeared in the deep blue sky, exactly where Quinn's favorite star always shone. "A sign," Zoe whispered, squeezing both their hands. "Mum approves." The reception was full of joy and laughter, of stories shared and memories honored. Alexander gave a touching toast about second chances and the courage to love. Larry shared tales of watching their love grow over the years. Even Eloise stood to welcome Sadie officially into the family, acknowledging that sometimes the heart knows better than society's rules. As the stars emerged and the fairy lights twinkled overhead, the new family of 3 swayed together on the dance floor. Around them, their loved ones celebrated not just a wedding, but the triumph of love over loss, of hope over fear, of family bonds that transcend traditional definitions. On Zoe's bedside table, the purple notebook lay open to its final entry. Operation Cupid, mission accomplished. Some love stories are written in the stars. Some are written in purple notebooks by determined 8-year-olds. But the best ones? Those are written in the heart, one day at a time, by people brave enough to choose love, choose family, choose happiness. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of our next chapter. Above them all, Quinn's star twinkled brightly in the velvet sky, blessing this new chapter in their ongoing story of love, loss, and the beautiful mess that is family. Because sometimes the most perfect love stories aren't about replacing what was lost, but about making room in our hearts for all the different ways love can find us. And sometimes, just sometimes, it takes a determined 8-year-old matchmaker to help us see what's been right in front of us all along. The end. Subscribe if you liked.